Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, incredible NBA career, but as we see in the Showtime documentary Stand, February 3rd is the premiere. The other parts of your life, the social justice activism, the way your NBA career ended, going back to your origin story of overcoming, poverty in Mississippi to the point where you become an NBA star and buy your mom a house. This movie moved me, this documentary, in so many ways. So, I want to start right there. How did you get to this point to make this decision now to put it all out there, your entire life story? Because you've been very misunderstood along the way. I think that's an understatement.
Yeah, you know what? I think I've had something to say for a long time, but the older you get, the more you read, the more you experience. On top of that, there's something always happening in the world. And then with what was happening with Kaepernick, right?
Yeah.
The storm that came from that, and just the history of athlete activism, I thought that there's no better time than now. And then with Kaepernick getting his publishing company and then just rolling into this, it just made sense.
To start to talk to you, I mean, there's so many categories, directions we could go because of the impact you've had in these big moments you've been a part of. But, I watched you, meticulously through your journey in college and the NBA, and, it ended, and it ended too early. And when you look back on it, man, do you feel you were blackballed? Do you feel that that's the truth of what went down in terms of why you ended up out of the league so quickly and where your reputation went? I want to say fair or not, for the most part, it seems unfair, looking back on that. You upset? What you say, come full circle, you get a chance to put the movie out there. But for me, from just a basketball standpoint, I'm like, there was more under that hood.
Of course, but that's because you're engaging the material, you're reading in between the lines. I definitely believe that. Initially, though, when it happened, I didn't want to just jump because that's easy for people to do. It's like when a white person do something to somebody, even though there's racism, there's just this world is soaked in racism, right? It's easy for a white person does something, oh, it's racist. It's not always racist when something happens. So it's not always a blackball when somebody's out the league either. So initially when that happened, I'm like, you know what? Let me just sit and pay attention. But when I came back, I said, I'm gonna be a professional and we'll see how it goes. When my minutes started to decrease, when it seems like, usually when I didn't play, a lot of journalists would say, hey, why aren't you playing? And even coaches I started hearing would come to the arena and say, hey, man, what's going on? We organize our defenses around this guy. Tom Janovich was one of them, right? And now it's like not even a handful of journalists I'm hands off. And then they come out with this on television showing the top free throw shooters in the league, and they don't show me. I'm like, huh.
Interesting.
So it's kind of like what Kaepernick, what they went through with the colluding, right? We know there's a country club. We know people talk. And then when my agent called Coangelo, and I'm still in my prime, and before he can even finish, he said, hey, man, we're calling about Mahmoud. We're not interested, and it has nothing to do with his basketball either. And then there was another agent, general manager, that said the same thing, that, hey, man, if Mahmoud was, he would be making, but what happened to him had nothing to do. But these things are said silently, but they're not said publicly. So definitely I believe that.
So, it's great that this comes out now, this documentary and the message, and really allowing to spotlight the things you've been through that, looking back, I remember you being villainized by the press. So is it one reason? Is it one incident? Is it being outspoken about Islam? Is it the national anthem controversy? Is it everything? I mean, you look back in the 90s at where we were socially, that sadly, I can say, I guess I understand how it happened. But did it ever come down to anything that was based in truth on the idea of don't sign this guy? He's damaged goods, or he's more problem than he's worth. Did you ever feel like it was one thing or everything?
I thought it was a combination of things, but I think the nail in the coffin was, and it wasn't even, I'm disrupting business when it's all said and done. And when you deal with an African-American athlete athletes, entertainers, musicians, whether we like it or not, listen, youth oftentimes statistically are probably going to listen to us more than they listen to their parents and the school teacher
Yeah.
because of the influence. And so even back in the day during J. Edgar Hoover's period, is now declassified information. He had came out and said something down the lines of, we want to, I'm just paraphrasing, we want to promote the brain dead athlete, not like the Muhammad Ali's, right? This is what we want to push to the public because of the influence that they had. And so when you topple that on top of that with, you have someone that is practicing their religion. Like even with AC Green was a Christian.
Yeah.
AC Green was like, he wore Christianity on his sleeves. That's kind of shunned even, right? Because there's a country club environment, right, of other things that they don't want.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear about your celibacy was what we used to say, right? You know, it's like.
But even if it's not hearing about it, it's just the fact that you're there and we know that you're trying to be on the straight and narrow and you make us feel uncomfortable because we're doing what we know we shouldn't be doing in a sense. And so with all of that, and you say something about this country, right? And so many people, there's this intoxicated, I think here there's this intoxicated nationalism and patriotism.
Sure.
Everybody, even in Islam, says he created us in nations and tribes, not so that you'll despise one another, so that you'll know one another. The best of you is he that is most righteous. So even we like, oh, but it's intoxicated. It's like, oh, we can't do no wrong. And so I think when it's all said and done, it wasn't so much me. It was like kind of like what Noam Chomsky said, the threat of a good example or bad example, depending on what you say. You know what? We have to make an example of him to send a message to others that if you do this, this is what's going to happen to you.
Yeah, it was, I guess you went down to the root point of disrupting the machine. If it comes down to money and not great for business, at least back then that was allowed to happen. What is the reaction when you see athletes of today, when they get a chance to meet you, when you see a Colin Kaepernick who, you know, underwent to some degree a parallel journey in some of the same categories? Do you feel like you get, I guess, the flowers you deserve after the fact, which is a big part of what this film's trying to say?
You know what? Just like we would do when we see Muhammad Ali and Tommy Lee and John Carlos, we know that those guys, not that I'm even putting myself in their category, but those predecessors, man, they paved the way. They were the pioneers. They influenced us in so many ways, like as they were influenced to do this from others. And so Kaepernick, when I met him, very gracious, very respectful. I get this a lot, you know, from athletes, from military personnel. Right? They said, man, I didn't understand it then, but man, and I thought you were this and I thought you were that, but man, now I understand and I see. And I just want to thank you, man, you know, for what you stand for and what you've been continuing. And I say, I'm always humbled when I hear that. Thank you so much. I said, look, you know, we're all in different spaces at different places at different times. Now that you're here, let's keep it moving. You know what I mean?
Look, yeah, a name you mentioned in there, Muhammad Ali. What's that meeting like? What year was that? What are the circumstances?
Man, Muhammad Ali was like, he's like, he's almost untouchable when you want to talk about, you know, sports activism, wearing his faith on his sleeve, being vocal. But also what people don't see and they don't understand is, you know, there's a saying that justice is what love looks like in public. Right. So when you have, you know, they want to ostracize, they want to villainize, you know, because they think, oh, look at what he's doing, it's crazy. But man, really sit back and listen to what people are saying. You know, they're coming from a place, you know, if people feel abused, if people feel mistreated, you know, would you rather them try to sit down and talk or air it out and say what they have to say, or would you rather them pick up some bullets and guns, right? So you should be like, look, man, it's coming from a place of love, really. Love because they know that we're better than this and this could be better. But instead, we want to villainize, we want to condemn and trash. Now listen to the people and what they're saying. Listen to where it's coming from, right? And so for me, you know, we're taught that if you take one life unjustly, it's as though you've killed all of humanity. So if you save a life, right, the reverse can happen. So it's all about being of benefit, but it's all about addressing the evils, addressing the harms, you know, because you can't be for justice and injustice at the same time,
Sure.
you know.
Well, look, the journey is the life journey, the more important one, but the basketball one is where so many of us got hooked on you. And I see now, you know, and it's a great hook to sell the documentary. It's like, you know, the origin story of the type of player that a great one today, an all-time great like Stephen Curry became. And it's like, I see that comparison definitely. And God, is that no level of disrespect to be compared to a great like that? But I'm old school enough to know about the hand check, to know about the price. I mean, you know, look, I don't mean this, but when you're talking about 80s and 90s and the old physical game, you're like, man, I love Steph Curry, but could he have been Dana Barros back in the day? Like, could he be, you know what I'm saying? Because the rules were set up in a way and things change. Look in the NFL today. You can't put your hands on anybody. Things change. How hard was it for you to score 19 points a game in the mid 90s when you're going against, you know, the latter days of the bad boys, the Pat Riley Knicks, the Charles Barkley 76ers, when if you drive to the lane, they are going to put you on the ground with authority. So when I hear people say, you know, maybe a predecessor to Steph Curry, I don't know what you could have scored in this era, Mahmoud. I really don't know.
Yeah, it was definitely more physical back then. It was, and anytime it's more physical, it's going to be more challenging. Any resistance makes things more challenging. But on top of that too, it was a different era in that no matter how good or not so good your big man was, you had to go through the big man. It wasn't like it is now. It's like, man, and I say this religiously. We had every now and then we had a green light. Man, Golden State have a fluorescent light. They could just, I mean, and the goal is like 3-4 times bigger when you, and it's just a different shot than when you're looking over your shoulder. That's just the nature of it. But having pushed back on that a little bit, not all, but some of these athletes, I think that if they had to grow up because they're so skillful and can shoot and they got that heart, they would have made adjustments. Now, would they, with resistance, be scoring the same amount? No, because anytime you add resistance, prime example is when Dara Dover, I think his name, in Cleveland, there was a 2-game stretch when he was leaning on Curry without the ball. He kept leaning. He was putting his weight, even when he didn't have the ball. He would follow him. He challenged everything to the point Curry was thinking, look for him. And he didn't have a good game. The next game, he wasn't playing well. Then Dara Dover got tired. And then he got into his bag and it was over. So that's the difference. Back in the 80s and 90s, you have to do that every night. Somebody's laying on you, and it's a different type of mentality.
Well, then you got Derek Harper holding you with 2 hands. You can't go anywhere.
Oh, Derek Harper. Look, man, that dude, he would hold, he would push, but he played defense. He was strong. You know what I mean? And refs gonna look at you like, deal with it.
Well, that was the game. Yet your speed, you know, allowed you, obviously your shooting touch, but your speed allowed you to do things that, you know, for a guy your size, even then, 6'1" guard, we didn't think possible. Obviously, Iverson came at the tail end of your career and was doing. I'm sorry.
5'11" and a half.
Exactly. Yeah. The real height, 5'11" and a half for sure. So let's talk about your competitiveness, because look, you were playing basically at an all-star level at your peak, and just your story's crazy enough that you have your best year in 96 and then you get traded away from the Nuggets. And then soon after we don't see you again, but you've got enough mano-a-mano battles, whether it's going back to college, and the documentary highlighted the Georgetown game in which your future teammate Shaquille O'Neal was watching. And, you know, he's got the great quote of, I saw God playing out there. You were able to raise your game in some of these mano-a-mano matchups against the Bulls, against the Lakers. You know, talk about being on fire, being in a zone. It was another level. Is that competitiveness at the end of the day that allowed you to enter that space, you know, so consistently?
Yeah, well, definitely. And with competitiveness is going to come consistency. You know, in and day out, imagining scenarios, training, even when you're by yourself, like 2-3 people on you and hand in your face, swiping at the ball, putting the body on you, going up, you acting like somebody's on you. And so this is Also because you know what you're going to be up against, and so you're planning for all of that. So yeah, the competitiveness, man, look, you cannot make it on that level and sustain playing on that level without it, because guys will, if somebody in the NBA, and this is the rule, if a guy score on you and he score on you again, we do it. If Jalen Rose is hot, we gonna give him the ball every time down until they stop him, and then it'll come back to us because they're gonna double, and they're gonna exploit your weaknesses all day. They're not gonna run away. And so I don't know about now. I'm assuming they still do that, but you had to be a competitor, or you won't last.
What do you trace back as the root of that? Because for anybody that ends up becoming a pro athlete, you have to at an early time in your life separate yourself from the others in terms of the work ethic, the mental focus, all of that stuff, that intangibles that need to be a 10 out of a 10 to become a pro athlete. What's the secret sauce for you? And sometimes, look, it can come from hardship, it can come from anything, but what is the secret sauce what gave you that drive?
For me, man, I'm always involved God in the process, knowing that God gave me these abilities and I don't want to waste it. Also, man, just individually, personally, wanting to be great, not wanting to be second fiddle to nobody, wanting to leave a legacy. And then also the hardships, man. I got to feed my family.
Yeah.
And then I want to help people someday. I had many motivators, because sometimes thinking about your mama at that time ain't the strongest that day. It could be, man, it's an opponent that I got to meet that I don't know. He might be 6'5", fast, and that's on your mind that day. So every day you might pull from different things to motivate you. But for me, those are the things that I stayed with and kept on thinking about, not wanting to have a 9 to 5. All of that, man. So it's like, hold on, let me get up and go. And
all right, your end-to-end speed, 94 feet, was great, but I think, even better, you're just quick in your movements to get off just enough space to get your shot off. Who of your contemporaries back then could match that speed where you'd go, I'm not just going to be able to just juke this guy? Who kept you up at night knowing that their speed could give you a problem?
Well, not necessarily speed, but man, one of my toughest opponents, and it's different. I'm talking about just like straight up one-on-one. He had the hesitation. Now he wasn't prolific with the jump shot, but he could hit the 10 to 12 footer. He can finish with either hand, but he was crafty. That hesitation. Rod Strickland, man.
People don't talk enough. People don't. What a finisher, too. What a finisher.
Yeah, Rod Strickland. I'm like, man, God, we went at each other, but he was like just crafty.
Absolutely. Love it. Love it. I love it right there. Look, I got to ask you this, because
yeah,
your job gets taken from you more or less. And even a scheduled potential comeback with the Knicks in the early 2000s, a comment you made on television, it was like you got blackballed all over again. And people can debate the merits of that or all that. But you're a man going through that time where your dream is, at least from a career standpoint, is taken from you. Your house gets burned down, another category altogether. How are you keeping things together mentally during that stretch? Because that's a topic now, but to look back at your journey, obviously it's not a day-to-day topic. You weren't even properly diagnosed with Tourette's until, at a later point. So how did you deal with keeping your head on straight during times where professionally your name is just getting trampled on?
My faith, man. I accepted Islam. And there's a saying that whatever God has for you, nobody can keep it from you. And whatever he don't have for you, nobody can give it to you. And that he's going to try you through hunger, loss of life, worldly goods, and labor's fruit, but give good news to those who are patient in adversity. For when they're confronted with calamities, from God do we belong, and to God shall we return. So just all of that, and then associating myself, man, constantly surrounding myself around positive people. You know what I mean? And not just yes men and yes women, just positive people, and just being consistent, having the conversations, to keep me on track, because we got to talk to ourselves. We got to remind them, no. I have dialogue with myself, right? And that stuff keeps you strong. And so I'm just constantly doing that, man, and just trying to get my rest, trying to stay trainings, trying to stay ready, and just say, what's the saying? Don't concern myself with things beyond my control. Right? Those things I want to deal with, I don't deal with, and make the, right, the necessary priority, set my priorities straight. So that kept me, man. My faith put everything in balance to do all of those things. Without it, no, who's to say, man? I probably, God knows best, but that's a lot to go through. That's a lot to hear, your name being trashed.
Sure.
You know yourself. You know the type of person you are. I'm a people's person. I love people, but I love people enough too to where, look, man, I don't like to see people abused. I don't care who you are, what your religion is. I don't care what your ethnicity is, your race is. I despise seeing people, taken advantage of. I don't care who it is. The black cops that just killed this young man.
Sure.
I got the same language for them that I got for a white cop that'll kill a black dude, or a white cop that'll kill an innocent white dude. It's same language.
Yeah.
Same language.
Here's what's interesting in watching all the file footage, which the documentary does a great job of framing your personal headspace during all of these crazy events that lead up to the big moments as a professional. And man, you were really mature at a young age. You had perspective, and I can hear what you're saying, where it goes back to your faith. And before you found Islam, you were deep in the Christian faith. How early do you think that you felt, I don't know, I feel like this could be for anybody of any faith, that there's a calling on all of our lives to do something great and grand, no matter what religion you come from. I feel like you understood that level of wisdom and maturity very early. Would that be a true statement?
Well, I knew very early that I loved people, and then I was always taught the value of praying to God, but praying for others more than you pray for yourself, because it all comes back. It's like the saying, if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others.
Yeah.
The goal in life is to find your gift. The purpose in life is to give it away, because more comes back to you. So I was always brought up with that philosophy, but I wouldn't have been. And I always admired, like when I would see Muhammad Ali, or when I would be watching television and I would see people, man, they are criticized, or their life is taken because they stood for something. Man, it always angered me when I was a child, to see that, and I always loved to see people fighting for others. I didn't know that I was going to be, you know what I mean? But I knew my heart, but I didn't know that this was going to be what it is, but I'm not running from it.
I love that. I love that. You got a lot of interviews to do. You're a busy guy, but I wanted to have you kind of hit on this before we go, because I'm a big fan of mental health awareness, and I've been changed through a lot of things. A Showtime documentary on Mauro Ranallo, the great combat sports announcer, and his bipolar disorder. You know what it did to me? It opened up my eyes to mental health in my own journey, but it showed me through Mauro's passion that his condition, being bipolar, has a lot of negatives, but oh boy, there's a lot of superpowers and positives that he's been able to use to strengthen him and share his message. I felt a little bit of that coming out of you and some of that file footage talking about Tourette syndrome and the battles that you've gone through just to get out the door. But how would you frame the positives of what you're able to take from something that people wouldn't wish on someone else, but you've seen to have grown despite that?
Positive. Well, first, there's a book. There's plenty of books out there, but there's one book, man, by Malcolm Gladwell, talking about David and Goliath, and he talks about how we perceive advantage and disadvantage, and man, I wouldn't. Tourette's is going to push you, and I say this all the time. I wouldn't be the extent of the person I am, nor the basketball player that I became, nor even on this level of being courageous and brave enough to just put it on the line and say what you got to say, whether people like it or not. Because Tourette's forces you in ways that I tell people, Tourette's pushed me where I myself would not have gone without it. So when I want to stop, they say, hey, don't say that, Nick. I'm going to make your day miserable. I'm going to make your tics worse. I'm going to and it will happen. So it's like almost you got to, but then what happens, the more you do it, just like they say with anything, if you want to get good at something, you practice. So it forces the practice more that you don't necessarily, I like it, I want to do it, but I ain't want to do it this much to this degree.
Right.
But then you begin to love it, because why? you start seeing the benefits. Now it's not as hard to do. So it forces you to practice beyond where you wouldn't have practiced. And then it makes things easier down the road and you begin to see the benefits so you understand it more. And it's all about perception. It's all about perception.
Hey man, life's about perception. And I got to be honest here to close here. Your career has, because I could look at it only from a basketball standpoint and do the half full thing and say, man, what could have been, you know, with all that talent, even though you accomplished so much. I think in this documentary, we're seeing not what could have been, but what did happen and what you stand for. And look, February 3rd, Showtime, the Stand documentary. Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, it's a pleasure, man. Okay. I mean, I had a million questions. I mean, you had some balls entering that 93 slam dunk contest without an NBA dunk under your record. I was there for that one. I remember that one, but
I didn't want to be there, man. My teammates put me on the list.
There it is. Mahmoud, pleasure, sir. Best of luck on everything you're doing.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you, bro.